Hello and welcome back to my Let's Build a Decent Multi-rotor from Banggood. So last time we were connecting up the flight controller with all the soldering. This time we're going to be going into Betaflight and get it all configured. So you can download the Betaflight configurator from the Betaflight website, and then when you connect it up you'll end up on a screen that looks something like this. On this screen you can calibrate various bits and pieces and you can set your backups. But the first thing we're going to do is go into our ports. So you'll connect it up, you want to set your connection, so you've got your receiver connected. You want to make sure that you've got your smart audio or tramp telemetry connected and also your ESC telemetry. Okay, in the top right you want to make sure your motors are set to D-Shot 1200. That'll give you the best ratio and the best quality of signal. Right, you now want to make sure you change your gyro ratings, etc. So you can enable the higher rates for that if you need to. I've engaged dynamic filtering and set up 32 kHz sampling. I'll set my personalization, which is basically the bottom of the screen on the Betaflight OSD. So I put my craft name in there, which is how Ross is the call sign I go by. So I don't need to adjust any of the alignment or any of those details. So I need to make sure that my receiver is correct. So in my case, I'm using a S-Bus receiver. I can also set this option here, which means that my RSSI will turn on, so I can show that through the screen. And I've got various settings on here that I want to enable. So I want to make sure that I've got my ESC telemetry engaged. I want to make sure that I've turned off, got my OSD running. I want to make sure that I have all the options that I want to have set up. So those are what I've got set up on there. So that's what you want to have. So because we've got a buzzer on our build, we don't necessarily need beaconing to be on. You can have it on or off if you like. In this build, I'm actually going to leave it on. There we go. All these other options, I find there's quite a lot of these that are a pain, so I turn off quite a large number of them. So you find your preference. You can have them all on if you like, but I end up that beeps far too often for my liking. So you can turn off these items. These purely are buzzer options, therefore it's just notifying you of problems that you're going through. Okay, once you've done that, you hit reboot, and it will disconnect and reset the software, and then you should be able to reconnect again to the system. There we go. So we've now done the configuration. We just need to check that that's all as we expect it to be. So what we've left it as. Sometimes Betaflight has this odd thing where it decides to reset itself. So don't know, never quite understood it. Battery settings we don't need to touch in this build. We should leave those as they are for the time being. No need to adjust any of the settings here. PID tuning, we can go into that another day. We don't need to do anything for that. Now we go on to the receiver. So the receiver is quite important. We need to make sure that the flight controller is correct and that it's connected up to the receiver that we've already bound in a previous video. All I'm doing here is making sure that whenever I adjust a particular parameter on my controller, that I'm getting the right response that I'm expecting to see. So you can go through this and just check that your throttle is your throttle and your auxiliary switches are switching as you would expect them to. The reason the later channels, channel 12, is showing a varying value is that is where the RSSI feed is coming in from the XM Plus receiver. All you need to do is click in the top right here and select auxiliary channel 12, and that should then, if you save that, that will then give you your RSSI in your OSD screens. That should be enough for our receiver. So now moving on to modes, I've set my ARM mode on auxiliary 1, which is one single switch on my controller, and I've got angle mode and horizon mode on another switch, which means I can switch between angle, horizon and acro mode on one switch. They're both on one of the auxes. The other option is my failsafe. So I always set a failsafe switch on my controller just in case there's a problem. So that failsafe switch there will set whatever I need it to be. So that will deactivate the drone and make it into a safe state. I also have set the buzzer to that same thing. So effectively it will always failsafe and buzzer at the same time. And finally I've set a pre-arm, so I have a momentary switch set for a pre-arm, therefore I can't set the quad off without having two switches pressed, and also I've got flip over after crash if I need it. Once I've done that, I press save, and that's all that done. Okay, this brings us on to the motors tab, where I can turn on the motor options. Make sure your props are off at this point, and then I can spin up the motors, make sure that they're all working and that all the orientations are correct. Okay, so once I've done that, I can go to the LED board. This board already came pre-set up with LEDs as they want. I'm not going to go into how you configure the LEDs today, but you can do if you need to. The flight controller has its own built-in black box on board, so you can use the onboard chip for recording black box information, which you can use for tuning later. Okay, so now we're going to fix the issues of motor addressing. So you'd only have to do this if you've done what I've done, which is put the motors, the ESCs, the wrong way round. So what I'm going to do is run a command to get the information about how to find out all the IDs for the motors. So if you follow what I'm doing on screen, you can find out what the motors are and what their IDs are on the system. So I'm going to copy paste these, and I'll then put them onto Notepad. So what that means I can then do is, if I know which motors should be swapped for which ones, which I've got on a piece of paper, I will write them down, and I can then go ahead and change them in the CLI command. Okay, so now you can see what I've done. So here's on the screen the new bit of code. So all I'm going to do is copy and paste this. I'm going to put it in here, and I'm going to press enter, and I then run this script twice. So I want to run this twice because it makes sure the motors are actually correct. So there we go. I run it twice, then I select save. And then that will then reset the flight control. So that's how you readdress motors. It's that simple. Okay, so the last thing I do is to set my OSD. As you can see here, I've got a number of options selectable. So I've turned off most options. I don't like a lot of things in my screen. So as you can see, I've got a total flight time, which I find important. I've got a number of different options set up here that allow me to see what's going on, predominantly main battery voltage and things like RSSI. So please go and pick whichever options you feel are necessary and the ones that you find most useful in your OSD. And finally, the last thing we're going to do is just make sure all our ESCs are up to date. So what we're going to do is use the BLHeli32 suite, make sure it's the 32, otherwise it doesn't work. We then connect using the connect option down here while the quad is powered up with no props on. We can read our settings. We should find that we have 4 ESCs with all the information relevant to those. So once we've got that, we press OK. And then what we can do is we should then be able to check an overview, make sure everything's as it should be. We can see all the different interface options. We can do motor tests. Don't need to do anything with that screen. So once we've got all that information set up, we should be able to connect, and we should be able to go through and flash all of our ESCs to make sure they're on the latest software. So there we go. We're going to select flash. We're going to select the type of software we're using. We're going to select latest available option, which is that one there, press OK, and that will then work its way through every single ESC. Okay, so the final thing we're just going to do is make sure that all the motor directions are correct. So all the ESCs are now the latest version. I can now select which ones they are. So what I would then do is I would then go through each of the motors and set the motor direction, whether they need to be left or which direction they need to spin in. So you can do that by simply going onto the motors option, spinning up the motors, using your finger at a really low speed just to find out they're spinning in the right directions, and then you can then go back and save and adjust those settings to make sure they're all correct. In this case, I was lucky, everything was absolutely fine. So, hope you've enjoyed this video. Sorry there's been a whistle-stop tour through the setup of the BLHeli suite and Betaflight, but I hope you found it useful. I'll see you all next time.